Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. I'm actually, I kind of got dressed up for this. I never wear a sport coat. I'm a little bit more relaxed, but things happen. And so, what else? I've just been chatting here with Micha Star Liberty, and that's a real name. This is not a stage name here. And we're she's a trauma-informed attorney, and her journey to where she is amazing. She's amazing. The work she does is amazing. And this is a phenomenal opportunity for me to have plunged into this to learn about things that I necessarily didn't learn and don't really know about. So this is great. And actually, to be perfectly transparent, I thought we would have to have canceled this interview, and I did cancel it only because I had a funeral and stuff, and that's why I'm dressed in black. But as things work out, I just happened to log on. I got home early. Boom, there's Micah. There I am. We're doing this interview, and it's really very, very special. So, I always call this my Johnny Carson monologue. There's no humor here. And most people don't know what I'm talking about when I say Johnny Carson monologue, which depresses me. And it makes me look in the mirror to realize I'm aging. Uh, but anyway, Micah, thank you so much for being here. And again, I thank the universe for getting us together. It's like perfect. So why don't you do a little bit of a little bio and a little history, and then we're going to jump into some really heavy duty stuff here. Take it away.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I think it's kismet, it's synchronicity at its finest. So I'm thrilled to be here and that we're doing this now. Um, just a little bit of background. I was born in San Francisco, raised on Maui and in San Diego. I attended a performing arts school and danced with several professional ballet companies as I was growing up. Went to UCLA for college and then went to DC to work in politics. I worked in the Clinton White House first term. And then I went to work on the Hill for two different members of Congress, Anna Eshoo from here in the Bay Area and Mel Watt from North Carolina. And then went to law school. And I knew I wanted to help crime victims when I went to law school, but there weren't a lot of law firms doing what I do now. And some of the laws that we rely on weren't even in place when I went to law school. So as soon as I got out of law school, I started practicing law, helping survivors of child sexual abuse, sex harassment, adult sexual assault. And then when they passed the laws, finally, to make sex trafficking a crime and a civil cause of action, I started to take on those cases. That was probably 15 years ago. And I've been a lawyer 25 years, had my own firm for 21 of those years.
And you have some side businesses. We'll talk about that too. But more importantly, this part of your journey. So I was looking at my notes. You're a trauma-informed attorney and advocate, helping survivors of abuse, harassment, trafficking, which you just said. This is some really heavy, heavy stuff, and probably not enough of this is being done out there because I think it requires some amazing dedication and perseverance. It's not the kind of law that, big buck kind of law, corporate law and stuff. I mean, again, I'm no expert, but this is really dedication. And so let's kind of plunge into this so we can learn a little bit more about this. Um, I'm curious, what first led you to combine trauma and informed care with your legal practice? And it's not mainstream stuff.
No, it was necessity. So just a little bit more background, and I'm going to give a trigger warning. When I was 17, one of my dear friends who I went to the performing arts school with was um, uh, died and was raped and murdered
Mm.
by a serial killer. So this was in San Diego, California. Her name was Amber Clark. She was a dear, dear friend, beautiful ballerina, just, real go-getter. Um, and this serial killer was following women home from the gym, from pools, from the beach, and he would wait until they would get in a shower, with the water going through the pipes, kind of masking the sound of him breaking into the apartment or the house. And he followed Amber home. When she, went to get in the shower, he broke into the home, pulled her out of the shower, and raped and murdered her. He stabbed her multiple times. Sadly, her mom, Pam Clark, came home unexpectedly, and Cleophas Prince, this serial killer, was still in the home, and he raped and stabbed her mom to death.
Right.
So at 17, I dedicated my life to helping victims like Amber and Pam, but I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't know how to do it. And as you heard already, I kind of tried the political and legislative approach, and then I wanted to go to law school to figure out how I could do this, to help victims kind of going forward. And I did. And I was helping, children for the first 3 years of my practice. I spent time helping people who had been abused by clergy around the state of California. But I didn't know that I didn't have good boundaries. I wasn't, protecting myself from taking on the trauma of my clients. And so about 10 years into my career, so, maybe 8 years or so after I had started my firm, one Saturday, I just couldn't get out of bed. I was just exhausted, and I had no idea where the fire in my belly went and why I was so depleted. So I just started to do my own research about trauma and how it impacts us, and secondary trauma, which is really what I had. And so once I started to figure it all out, I started to employ my own practices. And in the past, I don't know, 5 or so years, there's been a big push in all kinds of professional settings where being trauma informed is accepted and expected now. So I just kind of developed my own way of doing it originally, and then I have read everything I can get my hands on, and I have included some of the information in a book I just wrote called Evolutionista, to help others understand how to be trauma informed if they can't get access to education, because there are other books out there and there are seminars, and I just take whatever classes I can to keep myself up to speed. But I wouldn't still be doing this, 25 years later, if I hadn't figured out how to protect my own boundaries, how to make sure that my staff are not taking on secondary trauma, and the organization, the law firm as a whole, and my other companies, organizations can get trauma and be impacted by trauma. And the symptoms look like all of the different criteria from the DSM-5, which is where psychiatrists and psychologists, they use that to diagnose PTSD, and it's the same type of symptoms, which is fascinating to me, but super helpful if you're looking to make sure, you, your staff, and the whole company is trauma informed or experiencing trauma as a whole.
This whole, what you're just describing, introducing this to the corporate environment, is this relatively new? And parenthetically, is this Harvey Weinstein business of his many, many, many years of abuse that has it's because it's become such a public thing that has helped your cause to create the awareness on the level, and it filters to corporations that they're aware this stuff happens.
Exactly. And I have some wonderful corporate clients who really understand the impact that trauma-informed training, even on a basic introductory level, can help various teams. it's just like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know that's been made controversial recently, but teams that are trauma informed, teams that are diverse, do better in the business that they're working in. You know, they're higher profits, better team cohesion. So these kinds of ways or MOs to go through, you know, your day in a business are really helpful to longevity, keeping people in the jobs that they're in, avoiding burnout. You know, compassion fatigue is a real thing and can cause, you know, secondary trauma. So when we're looking out for our team, you know, our work families in a way where we're it's kind of like the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, right? Don't intentionally trigger people. Don't violate the silos or the pillars of being trauma informed, because it's easy to go through your day in a trauma informed way and try to avoid triggering your, you know, your team or your underlings or whatever the structure is. And so, yeah, there are some businesses that are taking all of this seriously. You know, especially in businesses that are women run or you know, focus on women's issues. Or one of the companies that I do this training for is a fashion company, and it's mostly, you know, clothing for women, run by women, and you know, they really get it, and it's helping retention.
Yeah. You know, I came from the corporate world. I'm always proud to tell people I worked for a multi-billionaire and I learned a lot of stuff. But some of the things, this of course never came up because, you know, that was antiquated. But you just said some things I was going to actually ask you about that. Doing this right, working with corporations, this increases productivity and retention and longevity. So this is corporations love profit and all that. This is a highly profitable thing. You put so much into an employee, and
Right.
why not have them be happy and more productive and stay longer and instead of jumping ship? So wow. So you, and again, in a layman's terms, you're really at I would think the precipice of some amazing new things in corporate psychology and corporate development, uh, doing what you're doing.
And I've seen some incredible, you know, turnarounds. One of the things that we try to focus on when we do our analysis of individual employees or teams and the team structure is look at whether or not, based on kind of things that will trigger that employee or versus bring out their best self, to make sure they're in the right seat, the right role, because so many times the person, you know, the issue isn't a personality issue, an intellect issue, a motivation issue. It's the role itself doesn't bring out the best outcome, the best success for that individual. And, you know, I understand a lot of corporations are like, look, we need someone in this role. We don't care who it is, you know, so you've got to also be really clear in terms of what you're hiring for. And I see time and time again, especially when the pandemic started, people doing terminations and hires that are coming from like a fear-based, solely bottom line perspective. And you know, that those are not the best ways to do your hiring and or firing. So we
Wow.
do consulting with that too, and a real analysis based on the surveys that we ask the potential candidates. You know, how do you feel about this? What do you think about that? And we do, you know, statistical analysis in terms of what the role, what they can bring to the role, and whether there's an alignment.
No clue, you know, and most of us have no clue about all of this and how it filters in to the corporate world, to our world, because we could talk about this one little thing for like an hour at least. Wow. Um, you've taken on, and I love this. I always love David and Goliath. You've taken on massive corporations. What actually drives you to stand up to giants like Apple?
It's a sense of, fundamental right and wrong. We cannot allow corporations to put profit over people, especially when we're talking about children or people who are vulnerable in other ways. Apple has allowed what we used to call child pornography, but the survivors themselves have renamed it because they don't think that that really captures their experience. So now it's more commonly called child sexual abuse material, or CSAM. So a lot of the tech companies sadly have profited from the distribution of CSAM. And because there are certain, for example, on Twitter or X, there are certain hashtags that the company knows are hashtags used to locate child pornography or CSAM. And they could take it down. They can build an algorithm like that and block it or take it down. They also can and should be reporting all of that material to NCMEC, the National Center for Exploited and Missing Children, and they're not doing it. Apple is one of those that has reported such a small number of what we know already is allowed to exist on their platforms. They're just not taking this. It's almost like a second pandemic. They're not taking this seriously. And we saw in the pandemic the numbers of trafficking go up on Facebook alone 250%. The first year and a half in the pandemic. And, unfortunately, it's the trafficking, which can be online images, which has real damage to the survivors of that. They will say in their victim impact statement when there's a criminal case, often, I feel haunted, I feel followed, I feel, I don't know if I'm walking in a grocery store if that person saw my images. They don't know where to turn to feel safe and protected. And what we know happens a lot of times in these situations where we're talking about image trafficking, the people who want this material, these criminals, these predators who want this material, will oftentimes try to find the children in the images in real life. There is a real psychoses condition that makes them want to, once they have favorites. And some of the people I represent are in some of the most trafficked series that are out there. And, it's happened before where the little girl who the federal statute is named after, Masha Allen, it's called Masha's Law. After her images were trafficked, she was then located in real life and trafficked in real life. So, the ramifications are huge. And so to go back and answer your question, how can I not take on these massive predators? They are doing damage on such a wide scale, and harming, children and young people in ways that, we're just kind of starting to understand. But these are lifelong injuries.
Lifelong, lifelong. I know about lifelong things. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and there were things, the bullying thing. I was bullied because I'm 6'5", and there are vestiges of that. There are vestiges of that still with me, and is actually some of those vestiges helped me write this. I have to plug this. Those vestiges of bullying. So I can only imagine even far worse things that will stay with somebody forever. It's not going to go away. It didn't go away with me. So I understand what you're saying. Uh,
Yeah.
really understand what you're saying. Wow. David and Goliath, truly, truly, truly. Um, how come, Micah, traditional legal systems, uh, even in this day and age, often fail victims of abuse and exploitation? The laws are so far behind what's happening, correct?
They are. They are, especially when we're talking about the technology piece. There is this law that the online platforms think gives them total immunity. It's called the Communications Decency Act, Section 230. And the irony is that it was actually put into place because when, in the mid 90s, when the internet was invented, there weren't any parental controls. So there were a group of parents in New York State who advocated to have some protections so their children couldn't access pornography. So it was actually a law to protect children from the exact type of information and pictures and videos that we see being traded today with immunity, because it's been misinterpreted to mean that these platforms aren't responsible, just the people who are loading the content, but they're profiting from this content because it gets traded. For example, I have a case where after the image was located and reported, before the company took it down, it was re-shared or republished 170,000 times. Yeah. So, we just have to get better
Better.
about creating true accountability. But, of course, these massive corporations that are just printing money essentially have a lot of power in every, political building, every Capitol building,
Mhm.
both here in California and on the federal level. But to bring it back to the cases that we spend a lot of time doing, children who've been abused, or the real life in-person trafficking, or sexual harassment, which a lot of times includes sexual assault. The civil system and the criminal system still are not up to speed with where we are as a culture. There are still a lot of vestiges that in terms of language that's used, attitudes that some jurists have and that most defense lawyers have. There are arguments that are being made that have been made since the 60s and 70s. Like, if someone is reporting sexual assault, well, what was she wearing? How much alcohol did she have? The level of victim blaming
The
is
victims get more blame, and I listen. That's an old thing, and because they know they're going to get more blame and more everything, they don't even want to come forward.
That's exactly right. And we get a lot of calls like that. And, there is a period of time where when we're considering taking on a client, we ask them to sit with, are you ready for this? Is this what accountability looks like for you? And coming forward and telling their story in a lawsuit, even if they file it as a Jane Doe, they still know who the bad guys are talking about, or who the press are writing about. And sometimes they just don't have, they haven't done enough of the emotional work to be ready to even acknowledge to themselves what happened, or to be able to label it, which is why I'm so thrilled to have had the opportunity over the past couple of decades to work on legislation increasing the statute of limitations, because this is a heavy decision and it takes a lot of time. And, it's not an easy process. We do our best to protect our clients as much as we can, but the systems are judgmental. the language that's used is judgmental. And, the defense lawyers oftentimes believe it's their right and in their client, so the defendant client's best interest, to beat up on the survivor
Mm.
and, to make them cry. That's like, I've heard defense lawyers talk about that as a goal when they're preparing for the deposition of a survivor, that the goal is to make her or him cry, which, is gross to me, but I guess I'm biased.
We're discussing, you're taking on big corporations. One of my favorite movies, I'm a movie person. I told you my story with Casablanca. One of my favorite movies that I watch obsessively is Aaron Brockovich. Uh,
Yeah,
and taking on, Pacific Electric and Gas and winning. And it was the biggest David and Goliath, I think well, at that point in American jurisprudence history. Uh,
yeah,
and so you're doing the same kind of stuff like Ed Masry, and truly to take on and of course what they allowed is so criminal. There was another old movie. I watched another Justice for All with Al Pacino. And he uses some very colorful language in that. Anyway, I'm rambling because you've lit some emotional fires in me listening to you about this stuff that I so subscribe to. Anyway, just to
well,
take,
I do want to say Erin Brockovich is still out there, still doing advocacy. I've met her a couple of times, and
wow,
good on her, because I think she's doing work with some firms for related to the fires in LA.
oh wow.
Yeah,
You mentioned Maui. I did spend a few days in Lahaina a long time ago, and it was kind of a Garden of Eden. Um,
yeah,
climbed Haleakala. Well, I didn't climb it; I drove up. Um, but I don't think there's any place on earth quite like Hawaii for all kinds of reasons.
yeah,
So she's doing. That's just great. She's just amazing, truly
yeah.
amazing. And that story,
Really is.
amazing story, amazing journey. Good stuff. Um, just to go off topic, take a little bit of a deep breath. This is a little on the heavy side. So I forewarned you, Micah.
Yes.
So here goes one of my little questions. Excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
Someone living or dead, excluding family and friends, someone living or dead I'd like to spend a day with. Wow. There are so many different
But you
people.
can name a few. There are no rules here. You can name a few. It's fine. Sure.
Um, Mother Teresa, um, Mahatma Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher.
Great stuff. Okay. It's funny. Um, in this, I get a chance to three heroes of mine in my character, but one of them was Althea Gibson. You probably don't know who she was. She was this wonderful, amazing African American tennis player in the 50s who rose to the top, but had to battle racism. Because tennis was a very racist place. And the other hero, my character and I have is Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a civil rights activist, and she said to me one of the greatest things ever. Uh, um, um, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I love that, and of course Mamie Till, whose son Emmett Till was killed in 1955 in Mississippi, and she actually really sparked the American Civil Rights Movement. Right before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, a few months before that, she had an open casket so the world can see what they did to her son. And that was hugely brave. So these three women, they all happen to be African American, but so be it. Were my, my heroes, have been my heroes. And interesting stuff. But your answers, great answers. All right, moving on. Moving on. What does trauma-informed legal advocacy look like in real life? Kind of define that.
So what we do is try to respect all of the trauma-informed pillars. So there are different organizations. So one is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Trade Association. And they have 6 pillars. And then the Centers for Disease Control have one with 5 pillars. And I like the 6-pillar one because the 6th pillar, and I think this is very important, asks us when we're dealing with trauma survivors to always be mindful of someone who comes from a group that has historical oppression or discrimination. Because, that intersectionality can add an additional layer of trauma that person has experienced their whole existence. The other pillars are things like being predictable, making sure you're consistent in your interactions with the people who have trauma, making sure you're providing them with choice and figuring out how to give them a voice in everything that you're doing. So from our intake process through trial, verdict, or a settlement, we are constantly trying to figure out ways for the survivor to have a voice in the decisions. The law provides the plaintiffs, which are who we represent, kind of very little but important decisions, but they're just not 10 decisions a day for them. The lawyers are doing the legal advocacy and figuring out which arguments to make and what evidence needs to be gathered or whatever. The clients have the decision of, do I want to use my name? Do I want to go by a Doe or my initials? Do I want to file this lawsuit in the first place? And then the other major decision is, if the settlement opportunity presents itself, do I want to take this settlement? And so just being really clear with the clients or potential clients at the beginning of like, this is your lane, and then this is my lane, but I want you to have a voice. I want you to feel like your experience is being recognized and honored throughout the entire process. So from intake, we will say, do you want to do this over the phone, in person, over Zoom? If you want to meet in person, where are you comfortable meeting? Just really trying to give them as many choices so they feel like they have a sense of control. Because they've lost control. They've lost dominion over their own body, their own, mental health. And this is true, I think, even twice as much when we're talking about institutional abuse, where a trusted institution like a school or, a youth sports or a religious organization, where all of the failures enabling and, looking the other way led to the abuse. That feels, that weighs very heavy on a lot of survivors. It's very damaging.
And I can even begin to grasp all of that. Just opening up your eyes and your ears and listening and observing. It's incomprehensible to understand and feel what they're feeling. And what you're doing is so noble, really. Okay, so I get very emotional about this, like I said, because I have my own personal identifications with some of this in a small degree, but I do realize the gravity of this because it's a lifelong journey to have this, and I've had it. Uh, anyway, so how do you help a survivor go from like fear and shame to feeling empowered?
So the first step is to help them separate what I am there to support them in and what kind of therapeutic modalities they're going to need to engage in. It's really hard as a lawyer to represent a survivor who's refusing to go to therapy and then wants to get that kind of relationship or sounding board from the lawyer. Obviously we spend as much time as the client needs talking through certain things, but it's very important for us to work in tandem with mental health providers. Over the years, kind of figured out what modalities we've seen survivors benefit from. And now that there's EMDR, it is just wonderful, works wonders on people with significant trauma. Regular talk therapy is not super helpful. People feel like they're just kind of spewing out the same facts about the same traumatic experience, and there's not a lot of resolution. So helping them get through that piece of it, I think is very important, but also staying in our lane, right? We're not mental health providers.
Right.
But we've seen enough trauma to kind of understand. And we've seen so many clients go through the litigation process. We know where the inflection points are going to be. We know where kind of the landmines are buried. And so we just pre-pave it as much as we can, talk to them about what it's going to be like to have their deposition taken, spend tons of time preparing them for their deposition. And it's not so much about how are you going to answer this question, but how are you going to feel in your body when this question gets asked, to just get them not desensitized, but ready and fortified. And able to stand in their truth and express themselves when they're under oath. So it's a lot of, learning the hard way. When you step on a landmine with your client and you don't know that's one of their trauma triggers, they may not even know that's one of their trauma triggers. So being okay with having that experience and then being able to kind of guide them back to, this is what we're here to focus on. We do a lot of what some people would consider woo-woo stuff, maybe like deep breathing exercises, calming mantras. So we kind of talk about all of these things leading up to the events that we know are going to be difficult. So for example, if the client has a deposition coming up, we'll talk about what will make you feel safe in that moment. They're not going to be deposed in my office. It's when the defense lawyers call them to their office to be deposed. So they're in an environment that's probably a little bit more sterile. And also it feels like going into enemy territory for a lot of the survivors. So we talk about, is there a mantra? If you're religious, is there a Bible verse that brings you solace? And I have them write it down and put it in their pocket, to know it's there with them, it's close to them. We talk about how to and when to ask for a break, how to do self-care the day before and after the deposition or the following day. Just make sure that we're helping them think holistically about how they can go through that process in a way with minimal impact, minimal trauma response.
Like they've had enough. They don't need more, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Off topic question. You got my juices flowing. I've interviewed as part of my role early on in the history of this channel, which is 4.5 years old. I interviewed several people talking about intimate partner violence. Does that fall under your umbrella?
Yeah, a lot. Lots of teen intimate partner violence, lots of adult. So, a lot of the adult partner sexual violence has physical violence components.
Okay.
So sometimes the cases are not cases that we will file a civil lawsuit.
Is that not to interrupt, is that a hard lawsuit, intimate partner violence? Is that a lawsuit at all?
It can be,
Can
yeah.
be?
I mean, there are causes of action, absolutely. The real issue is on the civil side, all the system can provide is a money benefit. And so if there's no collectability from the perpetrator, it's putting a survivor through a lot to, at the end of the day, not have any real collectability. A lot of times those cases are handled more through the criminal justice system. And what we do is, pursuant to Marcy's law, we will help survivors on a pro bono basis go to the police, report the crime. If a criminal case is filed by the district attorney's office, we will also work with the district attorney's office to help them have access to the client, prepare the client for the types of meetings. We will sit through the preliminary hearing with our clients, do our best if we're in a county that has emotional support dogs to have the dogs there when they're testifying.
Wow.
There's a lot that we can do, and I do, like I said, on a pro bono basis, because at the end of the day, cases like that aren't likely to yield any financial benefit. But what we can do if there's a conviction is seek permission from the court to get restitution, and that will help the client pay for either therapy he or she has already had, or therapy necessary going forward.
One quick comment. I have a dear friend. He's a wonderful filmmaker. His name's Keith Aramonitis. And one of his awards, there's just short films, one of his award-winning short films, which is actually my favorite out of his body of work. And it won, I think, best short film in the Garden State Film Festival. He did a film. I'm such a huge fan of it, called "Be Home Soon," and no words are spoken. It's a 7-8 minute about this woman, the victim of domestic violence, and the effect on her. And when he calls up to say he's going to be home soon, you see her going through the motions of trauma and pain and fear. Well, we'll talk about it off camera, but that has resonated with me, and I watch that from time to time. It's powerful. It's one of his best things that I think he's ever done. But it relates to what we're talking about. We'll talk about that off camera. I had to say it. I'm plugging my friend Keith, but okay. I like this question because what are the red flags in a workplace culture that indicate deeper systemic harm? Are there red flags?
Absolutely, yeah. Absenteeism, turnover, increased gossip, people being missing deadlines, a lot of things that can look like someone's just behaving badly or being a bad employee, but it might be because the entire system is traumatized. And like people who were always kind of mellow, being quick to anger, that just there being a lot more tension in the workplace. And the one thing I think that's good that the employers get from the beginning is that turnover is expensive, and losing a good employee because of absenteeism might be because they're being triggered every day, or the environment is such that it's too much. Their nervous system is getting overwhelmed. The other thing is, most people have had some traumatic experience in their life, and especially now after the pandemic, everyone, alive at the time and working went through a global pandemic together. And so that's a very traumatic event. And I don't think that a lot of work environments have done enough to kind of smooth out the ripples of that impact or how that impacted. And all of the symptoms of a traumatized organization match up to the PTSD diagnoses that I was talking about in the DSM-5 earlier. So, it's textbook, literally textbook trauma playing out in human behavior in the work environment.
Okay, just changing streams a little bit. You have a coffee company.
I do. I
You have
do.
a coffee company, and you can tell us a little bit about the coffee company because I didn't have time to do my research but I'd like to know a little bit about the coffee company and how does that an interesting question. How does that tie into your advocacy work? Because you must practice what you preach.
Absolutely. So the coffee company, it, to me, it feels like a natural outgrowth of the work that I do. So the coffee industry is filled with abuses against women. So women who are from countries, coffee growing countries, where they can't be the one to actually own the land that they've inherited.
Wow.
They can't sell the land that they've inherited without their husband's approval or their father's approval, some man.
Mm.
There's also wage theft that goes on, um, labor trafficking and sex trafficking. All of the things that we're trying to fight here in the United States, I want to fight in this industry, and we are fighting in this industry. So, one of my mom's dear friends growing up is a woman who started an organization called Women in Coffee International 40 years ago. And so there are organizations out there that are doing what they can in coffee growing countries to help women. So what we do is only source from women-owned farms or women-operated farms. I've been to Indonesia to meet in person with some of the coffee growing plantations there. I have trips scheduled to other places. About a year ago, this organization that helps women in coffee wrote a bunch of microfinance books to distribute to women working in the coffee industry. And we paid for one of them to get translated into Portuguese. And there's one that's translated into Spanish and one I think that's going to be translated into French soon. Just to help women understand the business and get the support that they can. And so at Radiant Star Roasters, that's the name of the coffee company, we donate 15% of our profits to various organizations that help women in coffee internationally. So and I'll tell you, the coffee is delicious. So you can, feel good while drinking delicious coffee at the same time. It's a win-win. And the other thing is, growing up in my family, the coffee is kind of how the women, the commune, operated. So when my grandmother drank coffee from morning until night. And I remember being a little girl just sitting around the dining room table with my grandmother and my aunties and my mom, and that's how they would tell stories and connect. And to me, that was the imprint for how women bond and
Coffee.
seek and create community.
Coffee. Hey, somebody should write a book just about the whole evolution of coffee and what it is and how much of a part of our culture it has become. My wife and I were just coming back from the funeral and we drove by, there's a Dunkin' Donuts, there's a Starbucks, and there's a fast food type like 7-Eleven kind of place. And in the middle of those three, in the middle of all that, we just noticed they're building a coffee shop.
Oh,
And we literally just right before we looked at it, said it's coming along so fast. So, and I'm saying, obviously, somebody out there must know that coffee, it's such a part of our culture.
it
Uh,
really is. It
yeah, so
really
I
is.
marvel at that. So, okay, ready. I wrote it down, and we'll talk a little bit afterwards. As we kind of wind down. What advice do you have for someone who's afraid, and this is important, who's afraid to come forward to tell their story? And this must happen much too often.
Yeah, it does. It happens a lot, particularly when the alleged perpetrator, the perpetrator, is someone of notoriety. There are, we see all the time when, someone who's famous gets sued, then other people kind of then tell their story as well, because there is a sense for survivors that there's safety in numbers. And they see someone else has taken that step, and so they can come forward. But I think the first step is really finding a safe space to report, whether it's a lawyer, and it's always my recommendation that it be a lawyer. So there's the attorney-client privilege. Um, and getting into therapy to, get to the point where you can work through the fears associated with it. I mean, the lawyer can help do that too, but the lawyer is going to be telling you about the process, the legal process, and what to expect. And unfortunately, there are, especially if there's a criminal component to it, there are a lot of criminal defense lawyers who view it as their charge to destroy the credibility of the mental health of the survivor who's coming forward. So it's a kind of step by step. And thankfully, like I said, in most states, we've got decent statutes of limitations now, so we can help the survivor get comfortable with how the process is going to work. Again, letting them know where the inflection points are, and just giving them the time and space to really think about, is this what I want? And what's so heartbreaking to me, just, from my perspective, is how often we see the defendant say, she just wants money, or he just wants money. And I'll tell you, first of all, it's all we can get on the civil side. We can't put people in jail, or believe me, I would. But that's the system. And so this criticism, like these people are doing this just for money, is really heartbreaking. For them and for me to hear this old trope that really should be left in the past. But the other piece of it is it's going to take the survivors as much time as it takes them to get ready. And with respect to the money piece of it, I can't tell you. It's probably, I've not done the math, but it's probably 99% of my clients that when they do settle or get a judgment at trial against someone, and it's time for them to receive the check, most of them don't even want the money, because it feels like, and I've had clients say, this is rape money, I don't want this.
Yeah.
It's never an even exchange. It's as good as we can do, because that's what the system is. But this idea that they're all out there for some big payout, it's like, couldn't be further from the truth. And sometimes they'll say, even when there's a good offer on the table and we're saying, hey, this is a really good offer, we should talk about it, they'll say, I want a judgment. Because it doesn't matter. Like, the amount of money doesn't matter. I want this thing. This is what accountability looks like to me. And so that's why we have that conversation in the beginning. What does accountability look like to you? What's a win from your perspective? Because we have seen people, mostly women, but men and women and children, go through this process. And at the end of the day, they don't even want to come pick up the check.
Ooh, I can listen, everything you're saying as I'm digesting it all, and I'm putting myself in just little pockets of I'm trying to understand and feel, and knowing some of my background, which has nothing really to do a lot with it, but I do know that it leaves scars that stay with you a lifetime. I know that.
Yeah.
Know that. Um, and well, I took one of those scars and helped me write, that literally I took that scar, and it helped me, gave me some of the energy to write what I did. Um, Lastly, what systemic changes do you envision and you're fighting for over the next 5 or 10 years? And how can people support that? I mean, that's a big thing, big statement. But the work you're doing, I guess we're heading in the right direction.
We're trying. I mean, I think, the biggest challenge right now is making sure that we've got good laws on the books and courageous district attorneys who are willing to take on these cases. I'm in Alameda County, and we have the third highest amount of human sex trafficking here in Alameda County. So, and the rest are, along the border to our south. So just making sure we've got avenues for folks who've been abused in this way. One of the hardest things to get is therapy. And, a lot of survivors, especially when they're young and, if they've been trafficked, they have no infrastructure, no job history a lot of times. And, that's where we get our insurance. So, whatever we can do to help increase access to healthcare, mental health care. We've done a really good job here in California, making sure that we have what they call SANE nurses. It's training, basically, that's a trauma-informed sexual assault examination. But a lot of times, what we see happen, especially with trafficking victims, is the law enforcement, rather than going after the traffickers because they feel like they're playing whack-a-mole, they'll criminalize the women being trafficked, and they get prostitution charges as children.
Hmm.
So there's still a ton of reform. There's a lot more road to walk in terms of getting our systems to be trauma informed. I think there should also be mandatory education for judges about how to be trauma informed.
Wow.
And I'm just gonna keep climbing up this same hill, or rolling a rock up it, a
Yes.
boulder up it, like
Yeah.
Sisyphus. But I'm not giving up. I work with some wonderful lawyers around the country who do this work. And one of the things that I do when I travel, even if it's like a vacation, or I'll do a specific trip for this, is find a center for housing girls who've been victimized, either sexual assault or domestic violence, and just buy supplies for the center, the house, whatever I can do, to help provide benefit. It's amazing that a lot of these homes for women and girls who've been trafficked don't have enough money to make sure every girl in the house has her own hairbrush or toothbrush or, those kinds of things. So I'll just go buy, as much supply material as I can and drop it off. So I'm always thinking about this, and I'm always thinking about them. And, if I ever think of other ways to help people, I make sure to post it on my social media. So if other people want to follow along, they can.
Wow. Well, we touched on stuff here, and you have illuminated me. You think you know things, but you don't even have any 99.99% of us have no clue what's going on out there. We just don't, and it gets covered up by news, and this is so key. And I've been, I guess, gifted to have glimpses into this as I'm looking back, listening to you, Micah. Realizing that I've done some of this stuff, and I've worked with some mental health, and I continue to work with mental health runaways. So whatever. Unless I try to do whatever I can in my own small way, because I'm a great believer. One of the things I learned from my billionaire boss, and this is pertinent to you. One of the things I learned one time, it kind of explained that the area between these two earlobes, it's a very fickle area, and it stuff goes in and comes out, and it doesn't really hang around. He said, but the key is to get it 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times to go from one ear out the other. And like the 10th passage, it gets stuck in quicksand and it's retained. So the mission, I always feel my mission is to go for that ninth or eighth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th time to get it stuck. So that's why I take this and repeat and repeat and repeat. And it's a job that if you care, we care, you got to just keep promoting and repeating and educating. And it's that one grain of sand which will tip that scale, because it always does.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here, and really for illuminating me and being patient, because everything I had to rush through all this. To be continued, and I'm officially welcoming you to come back,
Thanks.
because it's all about education, really,
Yes.
truly. It's
That's right.
all, and making movies like Aaron did, and that's what it's about. So thank you so much. Don't leave. I'm going to stop recording. We'll do a 2-minute wrap. But in the words of actually a neighbor of yours, actually, he is a neighbor. He lives, I think, in Carmel. Clint Eastwood, you made my day.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Micah. All right, I'm going to just stop recording. Don't leave.
Okay.